A young white man demanded that a pair of black twin sisters vacate their first-class seats to accommodate him, a self-proclaimed elite traveler who insisted the seats were rightfully his. The seats had been legally purchased as a gift from their influential mother, but that seemed irrelevant against arrogance disguised as membership privilege. But after one phone call, everything changed. Every mask fell away. What would you do if someone tried to take something that rightfully belonged to you simply because they believed their status gave them more rights than you? On that train, speeding through the countryside, the dignified silence of the two sisters and the swift action from their mother revealed one undeniable truth. Dignity cannot be negotiated. Justice cannot be purchased, and true power always belongs to those who dare to stand for what's right. Inside the luxurious first-class carriage of the Coastal Express, Zara and Amara Washington, 17-year-old twins, sat quietly. Their excitement mingled with nervousness as they traveled for the first time without their mother by their side. They were the proud daughters of Dr. www.org. Sophia Washington, the renowned chief of neurosurgery at Metropolitan Medical Center and recently appointed to the National Medical Board. Since childhood, the twins had been inseparable, but this marked their first journey without their mother's direct presence. Sophia had personally arranged the two premium seats for them, 1A and 1B, as a special gift to mark their acceptance into prestigious universities. Sophia believed this journey would teach Zara and Amara invaluable lessons about independence, self-respect, and navigating real-world situations without adult supervision. As they settled into their seats, Zara reclined in the plush leather chair, smiling with satisfaction at the unprecedented comfort. Her eyes brightened as she gazed out the window at the lush countryside rolling past. Amara sat beside her, poised yet relaxed, engrossed in the book their mother had given them before departure. Occasionally, Amara would look up and smile, sharing her mixture of excitement and nervousness with her sister. This wasn't just any trip, it was a significant milestone on their path to adulthood. "Do you think we're ready for this journey, Zara?" Amara asked softly, her voice tinged with uncertainty. "Mom already said it, Amara." Zara smiled reassuringly, her eyes filled with confidence. "We can absolutely do this. This is our chance to show her that she was right to trust us." A train attendant in a crisp navy uniform approached their seats, smiling warmly as she asked, "Mrs. Washington, would you like some refreshments before we depart the station?" Zara and Amara exchanged delighted glances at the formal address, a courtesy they had only ever seen their mother receive. Zara answered politely, "We'll have sparkling water, thank you." As the attendant walked away, Amara chuckled quietly and turned to her sister. "It looks like this trip is going to be wonderful. I think we'll make Mom proud." Zara nodded with certainty, her eyes gazing out at the landscape gradually transforming into rolling hills. Little did they know that within minutes, this seemingly peaceful and meaningful journey would soon face an unexpected storm, true test of their maturity, courage, and dignity, one they never imagined they'd encounter. In that moment, as Zara lifted her glass of sparkling water to her lips, and Amara was still smiling happily at the attendant's kindness, neither noticed that the peaceful atmosphere was about to shatter. Confident footsteps echoed through the first-class carriage. A young white man appeared in the aisle, his tall figure wrapped in an expensive tailored suit, his sharp features set in a perpetual expression of entitlement. Blake Thompson was no ordinary passenger. He was a long-time Diamond status member with Coastal Express, notorious for his difficult temperament and expectations that far exceeded standard service. Blake's gaze swept quickly across the first-class carriage, evaluating everything as if inspecting whether it met his high standards. When his eyes landed on the two front seats, preferred spots on countless previous journey, satisfaction immediately vanished from his face. His eyebrows furrowed in displeasure, and his lips pressed into a tight line. Not bothering to hide his displeasure, Blake took a long, haughty breath, then strode toward Zara and Amara. His arrival immediately changed the atmosphere around them. It was as if an invisible chill slowly spread across the once comfortable, warm space. "What's happening?" Amara whispered to Zara, tilting her head toward the unfamiliar man approaching them. Zara also sensed the shift but remained calm, shrugging lightly. Maybe he needs something. Blake stopped in front of the twins, his cold blue eyes scrutinizing them with suspicion. His voice rang out clearly and sharply, loud enough for those around to hear. "Excuse me, but there seems to be a mix-up. Seats 1A and 1B have been mine for years," Blake said in a chilling tone, his words carrying an air of accusation as he directed them toward the twins. A nearby train attendant immediately approached, attempting to explain politely, "Mr. Thompson, we've checked thoroughly, and these seats are indeed reserved for Zara and Amara Washington." "Washington?" Blake interrupted decisively, not allowing the attendant to finish. "That name means nothing to me. Perhaps you don't know who I am. I am a long-time Diamond Status member. I never sit anywhere other than these two front seats." The passengers around them began glancing over, curiosity and concern mounting. Zara remained calm, while Amara furrowed her brow at the unreasonable and arrogant behavior of this stranger. "Sir, perhaps you should check with the train staff again. We are certain these are our seats," Zara responded calmly, her tone still polite. At this, Blake's face darkened with increasing displeasure, his eyes flashing with unprecedented anger. For him, having to argue over these familiar seats with two complete strangers was a grave insult to the status he believed he deserved. "Are you telling me I need to check again?" Blake sneered sarcastically, his eyes cold enough to pierce Zara's soul. "I don't need to check anything because these seats belong to me. Do you know how much I've spent with this railway? I will not accept sitting anywhere else just because of two girls like you." Blake emphasized the phrase "two girls" deliberately, as if trying to wound Zara and Amara's dignity. The air around them quickly became tense, like a taut violin string waiting to snap. Zara and Amara exchanged quick glances. They both understood that this was the first real challenge on the journey their mother had mentioned. But this challenge had come much more unexpectedly and intensely than they had ever imagined. The silence between the luxurious leather seats was now replaced by a heavy atmosphere, as if the entire first-class carriage was holding its breath in response to the arrogant accusation just made. Blake's last words, "I will not accept giving up my seat for two girls like you," echoed like a silent knife cutting into the dignity of Zara and Amara. Zara remained seated, her hands placed calmly on her lap, her gaze not avoiding, but confronting Blake directly. Amara tilted her head slightly, her lips pressed tight, eyes sharp as a razor knot from fear, but from anger suppressed with dignity. Blake, accustomed to giving orders and being pampered on every journey, could not accept being defied by two teenage girls, especially black ones. His frustration wasn't just about the seat, it was about the disruption of the unspoken order he had always assumed people like him were above, and others should know their place. "Listen here," he raised his chin toward Zara with a look of disdain, his voice no longer restrained. "You can sit anywhere. There's a whole row behind you. You still get to travel first class, but I am not sitting anywhere other than 1A. This has been my seat since 2019. I won't accept this change just because someone has a little money and a name." His last words were emphasized clearly, as if intentionally stirring up discrimination based on age, skin color, and social status. Blake's face at that moment was carved in stone, his jaw clenched, his eyes wide and cold, his lips drawn tight in contempt. A few passengers began to turn their heads, pretending to adjust their jackets or search through their bags, but clearly watching the situation unfold. No one spoke. They just observed silently, as though this were a high-stakes drama being performed on rails. "Sir," Zara responded slowly, not hiding her restraint, "I understand this seat may bring you many memories or a sense of familiarity, but we are not taking your seat. This seat was legally reserved by our mother, and we have the right to sit here." Blake's eyes narrowed as if that polite reply was an immense insult. He turned abruptly to the train attendant, ordering, "Get the train manager here right now. I'm not talking to children, and if you don't want to lose your most loyal customer, then do the right thing and put me in my rightful seat." The train attendant, who had been trying to remain neutral, began to show signs of discomfort. In all the thousands of journeys she had served, she had never encountered a situation like this, a customer outright rejecting the legitimate rights of others and loudly demanding the train staff treat her as though it were his private property. Amara leaned slightly towards her sister, whispering just loud enough for Zara to hear, "I don't think he's going to stop." Zara simply nodded, her eyes still fixed on Blake. Blake's voice continued, this time louder and clearer, as if deliberately making sure the entire first class could hear. "This is the problem when they start selling first-class tickets to anyone with a gold credit card and some ambition." Each word he spoke was filled with malice, openly revealing his discrimination and disdain. This was no longer simply a debate over a seat. It was an attack on their dignity, on their right to exist as equals in the same space. Some of the gazes from the rows behind began to shift. Some frowned, some sighed, but no one intervened. The atmosphere was stifling, as taut as a violin string, and any word spoken now could make it snap. Meanwhile, Blake still stood there, hands on his hips, his eyes scanning the carriage like a king waiting for his subjects to kneel. Zara, after a moment of silence, turned slowly toward him, responding with calm assurance, "Sir, I don't know who you think you are, but I know who I am. I am the daughter of Dr. Sophia Washington, and I'm sitting in my rightful seat, ticketed, confirmed. If you want to sit here, I'm afraid you'll have to wait for the next train." And with those words, the 17-year-old girl, with astonishing calm, had pushed Blake Thompson into a battle where he no longer had the upper hand. He didn't realize that this time his opponent wasn't a group of passengers who would bow their heads to avoid trouble, but two young women raised on understanding, self-respect, and a foundation of strength he could never have predicted. The atmosphere in the first-class carriage had not yet calmed after Zara's calm but sharp retort when Blake Thompson quickly lost the last bit of restraint he had left. The heavy air now seemed to compress, thickening and suffocating, as his mocking laughter rang out, dry and sharp through his clenched teeth. "Ah, so that's how it is," he said, ice dripping with sarcasm. "Another pair of those rich kids using the Washington name to squeeze into a place where girls like you don't belong." Zara remained still, her hands resting on her thighs, her shoulders not trembling, but in her eyes, the gentle light from before had been replaced by a deep, steadfast resolve. A clear awareness of what was happening. She understood that this was no longer about a seat. It was a confrontation between arrogance and dignity, between blind privilege and unshakable self-respect. Amara, who had stayed silent since Blake raised his voice, was not timid. She stood tall, her hands lightly resting on the armrests, her eyes piercing into Blake like a velvet-tipped arrow. She didn't need to respond with words. It was her calm composure that made the man uncomfortable to the point of madness. Blake, realizing that he couldn't sway them with pressure or his self-imposed title, began to descend further into insult. His voice grew louder, more irritable, intentionally projecting for the entire carriage to hear. "You girls don't know anything about sitting here. This isn't school. This is first class on a premium railway. This place is for adults, for people who've earned money and have a position in society, not for pampered little brats." A few passengers glanced up, confused. A woman with headphones removed one side, casting a look at the situation. An older man sitting nearby turned his face away, clearly wanting to avoid getting involved. But no one spoke, no one defended them, no one intervened. They chose silence, a silence that made the ones enduring it feel lonelier than any harsh words could. Zara quietly leaned her head toward Amara. She still stood tall, her eyes never leaving Blake. In that moment, they didn't need to say anything to each other. They understood each other too well. The bond of twins in their blood, their minds, and their hearts had never been stronger. A slow, controlled anger rose within Zara's chest, but it was perfectly contained by the calm exterior she had learned from her mother. She took a deep breath. When she spoke, her voice was still soft, but as sharp as a finely honed blade. "Sir, we're not here to be given permission. We're here because we have tickets booked by our mother. And if you want to argue about it, you'll need to talk to the railway company, not insult people who have done nothing wrong." Blake squinted, unable to believe what he was hearing. "You're lecturing me?" he nearly hissed. "I've traveled first class before you were born. I've stepped foot in over 30 countries, spent hundreds of thousands on this railway. I don't care who your mother is. To me, you two are just pampered little girls sitting in the wrong seat." His words made Amara furrow her brow slightly. Quietly, she took half a step forward, her voice as light as a breath, but clear and loud in the stillness between the verbal clash. "We may be young, but at least we know how to treat others like human beings." Blake paused for a moment. The subtle yet sharp retort from the young woman seemed to strike a nerve in his mind. The challenge coming from two black girls, something he had never imagined he'd have to endure, had insulted his arrogance to its very core. He turned to the train attendant, who had just returned after calling the train manager. Blake's voice was now as cold as a knife. "What are you still standing there for? I demand you move these girls to the back seats. Are you really going to let your most loyal customer stand in the aisle while these children stay comfortably in my seat?" The train attendant, named Rebecca, swallowed nervously. This young woman had only been transferred to first class 3 months ago. It was the first time she had witnessed a Diamond member lose their temper, and it was entirely outside the scope of her theoretical training. "Sir," Rebecca tried to regain her composure, "I've checked. These 2 seats really belong to Zara and Amara Washington. The system confirms it." "Then just switch it," Blake cut her off. "I don't care what system it is. I'm Blake Thompson. I sit in 1A. Do you understand?" Rebecca took half a step back, her eyes starting to well up under Blake's pressure. The young woman felt herself pushed to the limit, but before she could say anything more, a calm, authoritative voice rang out from the front of the carriage. "What's going on here?" Everyone turned. A middle-aged man with a stern face, neatly combed salt and pepper hair, and a dark uniform with train manager insignia, stepped forward. He was Daniel Roberts, a man with nearly 2 decades of experience handling in-transit incidents, known for his calm demeanor, but extremely practical approach. Blake immediately walked over to him as if finding an ally, and his voice turned soft but calculating. "Daniel, thank God. I need you to help handle this ridiculous situation. My seats 1A and 1B have been taken by these girls. I don't know what the railway is thinking anymore." Daniel looked at Zara and Amara. His eyes briefly widened with surprise as he saw the two young women still sitting quietly, not shouting, not reacting like typical teenagers. Zara nodded a greeting. Amara gave a polite smile. He turned back to Blake. "I'll check the tickets and verify immediately, Mr. Thompson." But deep in Daniel's eyes, something shifted. He began to realize this confrontation wasn't just about a seat, and if he didn't handle it carefully, it was going to become a storm. And in the heart of that storm, the young women he had once looked down on were now the ones standing on the side of truth. Daniel Roberts squinted as he held the tablet in his hands and scrolled through the booking information. His eyes moved from the clearly displayed names: Zara Washington, seat 1A, and Amara Washington, seat 1B, before slowly glancing over at the two young women sitting directly in front of him. Their youthful faces were calm, but in their eyes was something Daniel was not accustomed to seeing in young passengers: an understanding of their rights, an unbargainable self-respect, and a resilience that should not have been present in 17-year-olds. However, Daniel did not mention the seat confirmation. Instead, he lowered the tablet, turned his gaze to Blake Thompson, then back to Zara and Amara. His voice steady but laden with implication. "You know, sometimes in situations like this, we need to be a little flexible, especially when a longtime passenger like Mr. Patient for TTP.Veerstot.8.2. Thompson is dissatisfied, and that can affect the entire journey." Zara tilted her head slightly, a gesture of politeness, but one that couldn't hide her surprise. She immediately understood that the train manager was not siding with the truth, but choosing the easier path, sacrificing their clear rights to satisfy a valuable customer. Amara remained silent, but her expression shifted. It was no longer gentle. Now her gaze was cold, staring directly into the moral void unfolding between the words and actions of the man in front of them. "Excuse me, Mr. Roberts," Amara spoke, her voice soft but clear enough that no one could ignore it. "We cannot be flexible with something we rightfully own. This seat was legally booked by our mother. This is not a matter of emotion." In the carriage, the space seemed to freeze. Amara's words, clear, logical, and completely non-offensive, only made Blake angrier than ever. "Listen to that. She's teaching the railway staff." Blake screamed, almost losing his composure. "Do you see this? These girls are causing a scene, refusing to cooperate. I'm diamond status. I deserve priority." As if to add weight to his words, Blake turned to the back where a few passengers were watching the incident, pointing towards the young women and shouting, "If anyone can just come up here and sit wherever they want, what's the point of this system anymore? We have rules for those who sit in the wrong seat, but no rules for kids with money doing whatever they want." His words didn't just hit Zara and Amara, they also struck at the integrity of the train crew, at the professional ethics that Daniel Roberts had been trained in for nearly 2 decades. But sadly, instead of standing for justice, he chose safety, or at least he thought he did. Daniel turned to call his colleague, Mark Wilson, the tall train attendant with a stoic face who had just appeared from the back carriage. "Can you check if there are any other appropriate seats available for these young guests? We can't delay departure for too long." Zara raised her head and looked straight into Mark's eyes, but the man looked away. He simply said, "I'll check the back. There are a few seats available in first class." Amara turned to her sister, her voice shaking for the first time, not out of fear but out of fury. "You hear that? They're really pushing us out." Zara placed her hand on her sister's, a light touch meant to reassure her. She turned back to look at Daniel and Mark and said in a voice that wasn't loud but made everyone around them take notice, "I'm not trying to make things difficult for anyone here, but I won't accept being treated like an outsider. This is my seat and my sister's. We are not wrong. If this train is delayed because of this, it's not our fault. It's because someone thinks their status gives them the right to infringe upon someone else's rights." Those words made both Daniel and Mark pause. Blake was about to retort, but his voice was interrupted by a middle-aged female passenger from the back. "I've been traveling with Coastal Express for over 10 years, and I know how seats are booked. If they have tickets, they have the right. Mr. Thompson, I think you should sit in your proper seat." Blake spun around, his eyes red with anger, but no one spoke in his defense. Again, Daniel's gaze moved to Rebecca, the young train attendant who had been quietly witnessing everything from the beginning, holding the printed passenger list in her hands. Despite her limited experience, Rebecca still held on to her integrity until the very end. She stepped forward, handing the list to Daniel, her voice firm. "Zara and Amara Washington, seats 1A and 1B, confirmed by the system and payment confirmation signed. No mistakes." Daniel took the list, silent. There was a momentary flicker of embarrassment in his eyes, but instead of acknowledging the mistake, he simply said quietly, "I understand." Yet Blake didn't let up. He continued to apply pressure, stepping closer to the two young women, lowering his voice but filled with spite. "You think you've won? This isn't over. I'll be calling the CEO's office, and I'm sure someone will be held responsible for this humiliation." Neither Zara nor Amara responded. They simply looked at Blake with calm expressions that made the man choke on his own words. His threats, his prideful titles, and his empty threats suddenly seemed hollow in the face of one truth. For the first time in hundreds of journeys, he couldn't use his status to make someone bow their head. Blake Thompson, who had always appeared as a symbol of power on the rails, now felt isolated for the first time, and that was just the beginning. The lingering bitter glare from Blake Thompson still clawed at their backs like an invisible talon, even as Zara and Amara gently rose from their seats. No one spoke, no one touched them. But the suffocating silence that enveloped the first-class carriage made every step they took feel like walking on the verge of breaking glass. Zara placed her hand on her sister's back in a protective gesture. No words were needed. Amara walked close beside her, her head held high, indifferent to the eyes quietly following their every move. They didn't give up. They simply withdrew for a moment, like two warriors knowing that to win, sometimes you must step back and choose a stronger weapon, the truth and real support. Reaching the back of the first-class carriage, where a thick green curtain separated them from the rest, Zara gently pushed it aside and signaled to a young train attendant standing nearby. The young man, still clearly inexperienced with a hint of concern on his face, nodded quietly as he saw them. The expression on Zara's face conveyed everything without needing further explanation. Zara's eyes were enough to show that she didn't want to be overheard. He immediately stepped back toward the storage area, creating a private space without asking any more questions. Zara pulled out her phone from her coat pocket. Her hand trembled slightly, not out of fear but from the pent-up frustration and anger that had yet to be released. Amara's hand lightly touched hers, not needing to say a word. Her presence was all the reassurance she needed. The screen lit up, and Zara dialed the familiar number, a series of digits she had only used when she truly needed a kind of strength stronger than anything else in the world, her mother. Before the third ring, a deep, warm voice answered decisively from the other end. Dr. Washington speaking. Hearing her mother's voice, Zara's chest relaxed for a brief moment. But she still forced herself to maintain a calm tone, lowering the volume just enough so Amara could hear beside her. "Mom, it's me, Zara. Amara and I are on the train to Boston. There's a problem." Dr. Sophia Washington didn't waste time with unnecessary questions. She was the type of person who, when hearing a change in her child's tone, knew something was wrong. "Stay calm and tell me, is anyone hurt?" "No, no one's hurt." But Zara hesitated, taking a deep breath, then explained more clearly. "A male passenger named Blake Thompson is demanding that Amara and I be kicked out of the premium seats 1A and 1B. He says those seats have always been his and refuses to accept our presence." Zara paused for a moment, then continued, this time slowly but firmly. "The train manager and one attendant are also leaning in his favor. They're telling us to be flexible so the train doesn't get delayed. But these are our seats, Mom. You booked them." "They know that, but they're still putting pressure on us." There was a long pause on the other end. Zara and Amara could clearly imagine their mother, one of the most respected figures in the medical field, sitting in her office, her hand gently gripping a pen, her gaze slowly growing more intense with each word. Finally, Sophia spoke. Her voice wasn't loud, but there was a power in it that made Zara feel grounded in the face of all the injustice surrounding them. "You did nothing wrong. Don't let anyone make you think otherwise. Those seats are yours. You have the ticket, the confirmation, the right. Where are you now?" "We're in the storage area behind first class." Amara spoke up for the first time, her voice quiet but resolute. "I'm at the hospital, but soon everyone on that train will know that." Sophia paused for a moment, then spoke with the tone both Zara and Amara had heard hundreds of times in high-stakes medical situations. "I'm handling this now. You two go back to your seats, hold your heads high, don't step back, not even 1 inch." Zara felt as though a surge of strength had been injected straight into her spine. She nodded, even though her mother couldn't see her, and whispered, "Thanks, Mom." "No need to thank me. It's what I have to do." The call ended, and the space around them suddenly became still again. Amara looked at Zara, her eyes shining with a quiet strength. "I believe she'll make them regret it." Zara smiled faintly, not with anger, but with a sense of justice. The two sisters walked back through the curtain. When they returned to their seats, Blake was still standing there, his arms crossed in front of his chest, his face as cold as marble. He watched them with a skeptical glare, as if unable to believe that the young women could do anything other than retreat. But he didn't know that in those few short minutes, a wave of power had begun moving from a hospital in New York, and it was headed straight for that coastal express train at a speed no one could stop. At the executive floor of Metropolitan Medical Center, a tense atmosphere filled the main conference room. The attendees, consisting of senior medical staff and representatives from an international medical research foundation, were focused on a presentation of a $2.5 million grant proposal for groundbreaking neurological research. But at the head of the table, Dr. Sophia Washington had lost her concentration. Her eyes were fixed on the phone sitting on the table, her hands clasped together, her fingers tapping lightly, as if her mind were preparing to issue a command. Zara and Amara had returned to their seats, trying to maintain composure, but Sophia, always the woman of calm and strategy, had heard something she could not ignore. Her daughter's legitimate rights being violated by an arrogant man with the complicity of the railway's own staff. No further explanation was needed. She stood up, cutting off the speaker with a simple but firm raise of her hand. "Excuse me, everyone. I need to leave the meeting. Family matter, very serious." No one asked any further questions. When Dr. Washington spoke, people understood that any delay was pointless. She left the room with long, confident strides, leaving behind looks of concern that no one dared to challenge. As soon as the door to her private office closed, Sophia picked up the internal phone, dialing a familiar 3-digit number. The voice of her executive assistant answered almost immediately. "Yes, Dr. Washington." "Put me through to Victoria Harrington immediately." Victoria Harrington, the CEO of Coastal Express Railways, Metropolitan Medical Center's senior transportation partner for 5 years, the woman who had collaborated with Sophia at the National Healthcare Summit, and the one who had promised that medical staff and their families would always be treated with the utmost dignity. A few seconds later, the line connected. A clear, authoritative voice responded politely. "Sophia, I didn't expect to hear from you right now. How can I help?" Sophia wasted no time. "My daughters, Zara and Amara, are on Coastal Express train 217 to Boston. First-class seats 1A and 1B. These seats were legally reserved over 2 weeks ago with full confirmation details, but right now, a passenger named Blake Thompson is pressuring my daughters to give up their seats, and worse. The train crew is not protecting their rights. Instead, they are trying to push them out of their seats to please a VIP customer." Victoria was silent for a few seconds, not out of surprise. She had dealt with internal issues before, but this was the first time it had directly involved the children of one of the most respected figures in American medicine. Sophia continued, her voice lowering, but each word coming out like steel. "I don't need an apology. I need action immediately. If your railway treats black young women, no matter who they are, like this, then we have a deeper issue than just a train journey." Victoria immediately responded, her voice now full of tension. "Sophia, I completely understand. I'm sorry this happened. I'll handle it personally. I will send 2 senior representatives directly to the train to assess the situation. If there are any violations, they'll handle it on the spot." "I'll be waiting for news in 15 minutes, Sophia replied, then hung up without another word. She didn't need reassurances. She needed the truth to be exposed on that train right away. On train 217, the Coastal Express was still preparing for departure from its midway stop, but instead of the smooth hum of the engine starting up, the first-class carriage was filled with a suffocating tension. Blake Thompson, with a victorious smile, stood with his arms crossed next to the train manager, Daniel Roberts. Even though Zara and Amara had returned to their seats, he hadn't given up. His gaze shot over at Zara's phone as she slipped it back into her pocket. Clearly, he was trying to figure out who she had just called. Daniel and Mark Wilson were standing near the carriage door when the sound of rapid, decisive footsteps echoed down the aisle. The train door opened again, a rare occurrence so close to departure. 2 women in black suits, wearing senior employee badges from Coastal Express, walked in with serious expressions. One, with striking silver hair, wore the name tag Elizabeth Chen, while the other was younger, with sharp eyes, named Jasmine Patel. Elizabeth moved straight toward the train manager. "I'm Elizabeth Chen. This is Jasmine Patel. We're here on direct orders from CEO Victoria Harrington. We need to know immediately why legally reserved premium seats are not being protected." Daniel froze. His eyes flickered between Blake and Zara and Amara. The atmosphere was so heavy that it felt like every sound around them had disappeared. Blake stepped forward, forcing a smile. I'm a Diamond status member. I always sit in 1A. Perhaps there's been a minor mistake today. I just asked for those girls to move because of tradition. Elizabeth interrupted him, her voice as hard as stone. Tradition does not replace a contract. Young women are passengers too, and if you think that skin color or age gives you the right to deny someone their fully paid seat, then you're very mistaken. Blake's eyes widened, and his breath caught. Elizabeth turned to Daniel. Mr. Roberts, why didn't you protect the rights of the passengers? Daniel stammered, I was trying to make sure the train departed on time. I thought if the two girls moved, everything would be quiet, right? Jasmine Patel chimed in, but quieting things by pushing innocent people out of their rightful seats is not how Coastal Express operates. The atmosphere froze. Zara looked over at Amara. She bit her lip, her eyes slightly misted, not from weakness but from the emotions that had been held back, now finally finding an outlet. Blake Thompson had no more words. His smile vanished, replaced by a pale face, as if for the first time in his life he had lost control of the outcome. And that was just the beginning. The atmosphere in the first-class carriage was like a thin, taut sheet of glass, just waiting for a light touch to shatter it. And it was Elizabeth Chen's cold, cutting voice, the senior representative of Coastal Express Railways, that became the final force to act. Blake Thompson still stood there, no longer the confident diamond status man strutting into the carriage. Instead, before him now were people whose power no longer lay in membership cards or frequent traveler miles, but in decisions and consequences. And he was at the center of a decision about to be made. Just minutes after the conversation with Daniel Roberts, the VIP carriage door opened once again, the second time on the same journey, something that had never happened in the history of normal operations. All the passengers turned their heads, and this time the two people entering the carriage didn't look like train crew or technical attendants. They carried the air of decision-makers, not enforcers. Both were dressed in dark suits, employee badges firmly attached to their left lapels. But you didn't need to see their names. One could feel the power they carried. It was Jonathan Pierce, the regional director of Coastal Express Railways, and Olivia Mendez, head of internal affairs. If Elizabeth Chen represented the serious voice of the leadership, Jonathan Pierce was the one who made the final decisions on the ground, and he did not like to be bothered by issues that should have been handled at a lower level. When Jonathan and Olivia entered, no one spoke. The entire first-class carriage, passengers and crew alike, seemed to collectively hold its breath. The only sounds were the faint rustling of papers in Jonathan's hand and Olivia's calculating gaze sweeping over each person: Zara, Amara, Blake, Daniel, and then landing on Mark Wilson. Jonathan stopped in front of train manager Daniel Roberts. His voice was low, but it resonated like a bell striking a stone wall. Mr. Roberts, I want to hear it from your mouth. Why are two young passengers with valid tickets and confirmed reservations being asked to vacate their seats? Daniel opened his mouth, but the words barely came out. I was just trying to coordinate to make sure the train wouldn't be delayed. Mr. Placed at Ev. Thompson is a Diamond customer. He said that seats 1A and 1B are usually his. I'm not asking what Mr. Thompson said, Jonathan interrupted, his voice stern. I'm asking why you didn't protect the passengers sitting in their rightful, fully paid seats, seats confirmed by the system, the booking agent, and the final list. Daniel fell silent. Olivia Mendez stepped beside Jonathan, pulling out a printed passenger data sheet from the black briefcase she was carrying. She raised it high for everyone to see. Zara Washington, seat 1A, Amara, Washington, Seat 1B, booked on the 5th of this month. Payment confirmed through the banking system. No transfers, no mistakes, no system errors. Mark Wilson, who had been standing behind Daniel, finally spoke, his voice trembling. I was just following the manager's instructions. I didn't force them to move. Jonathan turned to look at him, his eyes narrowing. You're a train attendant. Your job isn't to pamper VIP customers. Your job is to ensure that every passenger, everyone, is treated fairly. When a passenger, especially a young woman, is humiliated, you choose to stay silent. Mark remained silent, swallowing hard. Zara and Amara stood behind their seats, eyes forward, not appearing victorious, but not faltering either. Jonathan slowly walked up to the two sisters. When he spoke, his voice lowered, but each word was clear. Zara, Amara, on behalf of Coastal Express Railways, I apologize for the experience you've had to endure. Our company has a responsibility to protect the dignity and rights of all passengers, regardless of age, gender, or skin color. He turned to look at Daniel and Mark. This should never have happened. Blake Thompson stood nearby, his face pale, but even so, his pride still made him speak, weakly but threateningly. I will speak to the board of directors. I have connections on the board. You are making a huge mistake treating me this way. Jonathan turned to face him for the first time since he stepped onto the train. His gaze wasn't hostile, but it carried a kind of power that made the person facing him instinctively take a step back. No one, not even you, has the right to take away the dignity of another passenger, especially when that behavior is accompanied by blatant discrimination. Coastal Express does not serve privilege if that privilege tramples on fairness. Olivia Mendez stepped forward, slowly pulling out a sealed envelope. Mr. Blake Thompson, she declared clearly, by the authority of the Director of Passenger Relations, I hereby announce your Diamond Status membership is permanently revoked, effective today. The reason: a severe violation of passenger ethics, misconduct, and defamation of another's dignity in a public space. Blake staggered back a step. No one spoke, but the entire VIP carriage seemed to vibrate with the aftershocks of that decision. Zara quietly turned to Amara. She remained silent, her hands clenched, but in her eyes there was a fierce light, not because of Blake Thompson's punishment, but because justice had finally entered the carriage in the form of people who did not bow to what was called tradition. The train had not yet departed, but for Zara and Amara, they had already weathered the first storm with one thing alone: truth and unwavering resolve. Blake Thompson stood frozen as he heard Olivia Mendez's declaration revoking his diamond status, what he had always considered his protective charm, the thing that allowed him to hold his head high and demand whatever he wanted on every journey, was now stripped away before the eyes of all the passengers, like a sentence that didn't require a gavel. But that wasn't the end, as the atmosphere in the carriage had not yet returned to normal. Jonathan Pierce turned to Daniel Roberts and Mark Wilson, his gaze no longer filled with disappointment but judgment. He didn't need any more reports or excuses, for the truth had already played out before him with plenty of witnesses. His voice rang out clearly, each word hitting like a hammer against stone. I am officially suspending the duties of train manager Daniel Roberts and attendant Mark Wilson for serious violations of professional ethics, favoritism toward a passenger, and failing to protect the rightful rights of those sitting in their legally confirmed seats. Whispers erupted all around. Passengers who had been silent now began to show their emotions. Some were surprised, some nodded in agreement, and some smiled with relief, as if someone had finally said what everyone had been thinking. Daniel stood stunned, his face pale as if he had just been punched in the stomach. He blinked rapidly, trying to swallow down the rising panic. "Mr. Pierce, please wait," his voice faltered. "I was just trying to handle the situation. I only wanted to keep the train running smoothly. I didn't mean to discriminate." Jonathan raised his hand, decisive. "You stood silent when passengers were humiliated for their age and skin color. You knew that seat had been confirmed, but still pressured them to be flexible. That's not handling a situation. That's ignoring the principles." Mark Wilson, standing beside Daniel, clenched his lips as if to protest, but all he could say was one short sentence. "I was just following the manager's instructions." Olivia Mendez immediately retorted, her gaze as sharp as a blade. "You are the one directly serving the passengers. You stayed silent while teenagers were humiliated in the VIP carriage. You stood there doing nothing. To us, that's not passivity, it's complicity." At that moment, Blake Thompson lifted his head, his eyes darting around as if searching for someone to cling to, but there was no one. The faces around him, the crowd he had once manipulated into silence, now looked at him with a very different gaze, cold, observant, and judgmental. Then, like the first crack in a proud statue, his lips began to tremble. "Are you doing this because of those girls? Because they're black? Because they have a powerful mother? And what about me? I'm a loyal customer. I've brought in hundreds of thousands for this railway." No one responded quickly. 2 railway security officers in gray uniforms appeared at the front of the carriage, stepping forward. With an air of authority that needed no introduction, they stopped next to Daniel and Mark. No hands needed, no force required, just their gaze and a clear command. "Mr. Roberts and Mr. Wilson, please gather your personal belongings. By directive from the Executive Board, you are to be suspended immediately. We will escort you off the train for an internal investigation." Daniel turned to Mark. He looked back at him. No one spoke. They both knew that from this moment, the transportation careers they had built over the years could be over. As Daniel quietly took off his manager badge, his hands trembling, he glanced at Blake, a look of hope as if expecting at least some acknowledgement of sympathy. But Blake only lowered his head, not out of regret, but because the shame had finally reached him. The passengers silently watched as Daniel and Mark left the carriage. No one saw them off. No one felt regret, only silence. Silence that was no longer out of fear or caution, but a cleansing after justice had spoken. When the door closed behind them, the first-class carriage seemed to brighten just a little. At the front row, Zara and Amara sat still, no joy, no gloating, but inside they felt a peace as if someone had finally restored the justice that should have been there from the beginning. Amara gently leaned towards her sister, whispering, "I never thought justice could step onto a train and stand in front of everyone like that." Zara smiled faintly, her gaze deep, looking out the window where the platform lights began to flicker on, signaling that the train was about to depart. "Mom always said, if we stand firm for what's right, sooner or later the world has to change." From a distance, Blake Thompson still hadn't sat down. Even though Daniel and Mark had left the train, he remained standing, his eyes lost. His status was gone, his control had collapsed, and now before him was a naked truth he had spent his life avoiding. Privilege cannot buy back the dignity that has been lost. The train carriage door had just closed behind Daniel and Mark less than a minute ago, but to Blake Thompson, it felt like a death knell for the privileged world he had relied on for so long. He stood frozen like a stone pillar amid the flood, his eyes vacant, but his hands beginning to shake with the anger that had been suppressed for far too long. From a familiar figure in the VIP section, always served champagne before ordering food, Blake was now stripped of his privileges, isolated and surrounded by silence from every direction. No one spoke to him, no one looked at him with sympathy, and it was that silence that made him explode. Suddenly, Blake shoved aside a passing train attendant, stepping into the aisle with a shrill metallic voice that pierced through the carriage air. "I want to speak to the conductor right now." The sound ripped through the air, startling a few passengers who turned their heads while others frowned in irritation. But Blake didn't stop. He stood there, chin held high, eyes wide open, as if trying to assert his power with one final collision. "No one has the right to take my seat. No one is allowed to silence me. I've traveled with this railway for over a decade, and I deserve an explanation from the conductor. I won't let two girls and a bunch of ungrateful staff humiliate me like this." His voice reverberated through the carriage, no longer the tone of a refined man. Now Blake Thompson was nothing but a shadow of power, screaming in desperation because for the first time he couldn't control the outcome. One of the new train attendants, recently assigned, stepped forward, trying to remain calm. "Sir, I need you to return to your seat so we can prepare for departure. Meeting with the conductor will not be allowed unless there is a serious safety concern." "Is insulting a loyal passenger not a serious enough reason?" Blake screeched. "Call him out here. If I don't speak with the conductor, this train will not depart." A silence followed, then unexpectedly, the conductor's compartment door opened. A tall woman stepped out from inside, in her early 50s, walking with the measured gait of a military officer. Her dark blue uniform perfectly pressed, and her conductor's hat removed with her left hand as she entered the carriage. Her face was stern, eyes sharp like the blade of someone who had handled many emergencies both on the rails and at the station. It was Conductor Sarah Mitchell, a woman who had served in the Coast Guard before becoming one of Coastal Express Railway's most trusted conductors. She walked toward Blake, meeting his gaze not with anger nor mockery, but with cold clarity. It was as if all unnecessary emotions had been stripped away, leaving only the essence of the situation. "I am Conductor Sarah Mitchell," she said firmly. "I've been informed that you requested to speak with me due to a perceived injustice regarding your seating." Blake, regaining some composure upon seeing the uniformed woman before him, nodded vigorously. "Yes, I always sit in 1A, always. Those girls are sitting there and refusing to move, even though I've been a diamond status customer for over 10 years. I've lost my seat, been humiliated, and treated like I'm expendable by the crew." Sarah Mitchell listened in silence. When he finished, she turned to look at Zara and Amara, sitting calmly in their seats, their expressions composed, neither avoiding nor provoking her. The conductor turned back, her voice low but resounding in the quiet carriage. "I have received a full report from the railway's operations representative. According to the verified system records, seats 1A and 1B were reserved over 2 weeks ago by Dr. Sophia Washington, the mother of the 2 passengers currently seated there." Blake opened his mouth to interject, but she raised her hand, not hurriedly, but firmly like steel. "I will continue, sir." He froze. Sarah Mitchell went on. "Being a Diamond status member does not give you the right to infringe on the legitimate rights of other passengers on my train. Disruptive behavior, shouting, delaying departure, or harassing other passengers will be addressed seriously." She paused, then delivered a statement that ended all arguments. "If you continue to behave as you are, I will have no choice but to request railway security remove you from the train, not because of who you are, but because I am responsible for maintaining order and safety for all passengers." Blake opened his mouth as if to argue, but no sound came out. The name Sarah Mitchell echoed in his mind, a woman who had been featured in articles for her crisis management skills, a woman with ultimate authority on this train. He realized he had reached the limit no one was allowed to cross. From the seats behind, a sparse round of applause began. No one was laughing, no one was mocking. It wasn't gloating. It was a silent acknowledgement that at last order had been restored. Blake, his legs unsteady, was escorted by a new train attendant to a seat further back. No longer in seat 1A, no more declarations of privilege, just another passenger, nothing more, nothing less. Conductor Sarah Mitchell gave a brief nod to Zara and Amara before returning to her compartment, saying nothing more, because to her, the necessary words had already been spoken through action. Blake Thompson sank heavily into the seat that had been reassigned to him at the back of first class, the very spot he had always scorned as reserved for second-tier first class. He paused for a moment, but the anger was still rising within him like a flame burning through any remaining semblance of composure. His eyes gleamed with fury, his lips pressed tightly as if suppressing a scream, and his hands clutched his expensive leather briefcase so tightly that it seemed as though it might tear apart at any moment. Despite being directly warned by conductor Sarah Mitchell, who had full authority over the train, in Blake's mind, that could not be the end. He refused to believe that he, Blake Thompson, the man who had been greeted with champagne the moment he stepped onto the train, was now relegated to the back, treated like an ordinary passenger. And so, he could not accept the reality that was unfolding. Minutes passed in silence, but then no one was surprised when Blake suddenly jumped out of his seat once again. "No, this can't be happening." His voice pierced the air, shrill and cutting through the tension in the carriage. A few passengers turned to look, some frowning, others sighing in exasperation. A middle-aged man nearby muttered to his wife, "Not again, please." Blake didn't care. He continued to march toward the front of the carriage as though his scream could reverse time itself. "Who do you think you are making me move to the back? I've traveled with Coastal Express since it was a tiny regional railway. I've brought this railway reputation and revenue for decades. This diamond status card is not something to be thrown away like a supermarket membership card." He pulled the shiny metal card out of his wallet, holding it up in front of him like undeniable proof of his power. "I'm a VIP customer. I have the right to sit at the front of the carriage." Jonathan Pierce and Olivia Mendez stood their ground. Zara and Amara remained silent, but their expressions shifted from calm to something resembling observation, cautious as if they were watching a play where the outcome was already sealed, just waiting for the protagonist to collapse under the weight of his own actions. Jonathan raised his hand, signaling for the attendant next to him to close the carriage door. A sharp click echoed, then he turned fully toward Blake, his face as hard as granite. This time, with no need for lengthy introductions, he spoke directly. "Mr. Blake Thompson." Blake halted halfway. Something in Jonathan's voice made him stop, at least for a few seconds. "As the Regional Director of Coastal Express Railways, I officially announce your diamond status privileges are permanently revoked, effective immediately." His voice rang clear and steady, without a hint of hesitation, like a sentence being delivered without need for further discussion. Blake stood frozen as though he had been turned to stone. In that moment, all the emotions that had been boiling inside him suddenly drained away. He blinked rapidly, his mouth slightly open as if to ask again, but no sound came out. His eyes moved from Jonathan to Olivia, then scanned the carriage as if searching for a familiar face to speak in his defense, but all was silent. A young passenger near the aisle quietly pulled out his phone, recording the scene. No one stopped him. Blake didn't seem to notice. He was drowning in the complete collapse of his sense of self. "No, no way," he murmured, stumbling back to his seat, still clutching the card that had now lost all its value. Olivia stepped forward, her voice still calm. "Mr. Thompson, loud behavior disturbing other passengers, disrupting the departure process, and refusing to comply with the crew and conductor's requests are serious violations according to railway safety regulations. Any passenger, diamond status or not, will face the same consequences for such actions." Jonathan followed up, closing his document. "Coastal Express does not maintain privileges for anyone who uses them to trample on the dignity of others." Blake stumbled back into his seat as if the strength had drained from his legs. A moment of bitter realization didn't come from sympathy, but from a cold truth. Power, when it no longer has ethics attached to it, is nothing more than a fragile, hollow shell. At the front, Zara looked over at Amara. They didn't smile, they didn't clap. They only silently observed the man, the one who had once shouted at them, telling them they didn't belong, now sitting with his head lowered in the carriage, alone like a ship lost at sea among the people he had once deemed beneath him. An older woman in one of the rear seats leaned toward Zara and quietly said, "You did the right thing. Not everyone can maintain their dignity in such a situation." Zara nodded, offering a silent thank you with her eyes. Blake Thompson no longer shouted, but in the first-class carriage of train 217, his silence now rang louder than all the previous tirades. Blake Thompson sat frozen after hearing the fateful judgment from Jonathan Pierce, the declaration of his diamond status privileges being permanently revoked. Something he had always viewed as an integral part of his identity. For a brief moment, no one was sure how he would react. But then, as if the last strings of control had snapped, Blake suddenly sprang up once again. This time, not in calculated rage, but in the chaos of someone who had just realized that their power had vanished forever. "No, I will not leave. This is my train." His scream pierced the air like a knife, slashing through the fragile silence of the carriage. He turned around and marched toward Jonathan as if he could reclaim something, but was immediately stopped by two security officers who stepped forward from the train door. The two officers, dressed in dark gray uniforms with emotionless expressions, moved with purpose and composure, the posture of those not here to negotiate. One of them, Officer Maya Rodriguez, took a half-step forward, her voice firm. "Mr. Blake Thompson, by order of the conductor and the executive representatives of Coastal Express Railways, you have been banned from traveling on this train. We are ordered to escort you off the train immediately." The entire first-class carriage went silent. Blake spun around, his eyes wide with horror. "You can't do this to me. Do you know who I am? I have attorneys. I'll sue this railway. I'll sue all of you, the conductor, the railway. I will make all of you pay." He wrenched his hand away from the security officer like an animal cornered, his hair disheveled, his breath ragged, still shouting. "I am the one who's been insulted. I'm the one being humiliated. I'll go on TV. I'll call the press. You can't do this to me. You can't." The passengers began to lose patience. An older man nearby shook his head and sighed. A young woman in the middle aisle pulled out her phone and started recording the scene. And a little boy sitting near Zara curled up against his father when Blake screamed once more. Conductor Sarah Mitchell appeared for the second time, her voice no longer carrying a warning, Now it was the undeniable authority of law. "Mr. Thompson, this train cannot depart while you continue to cause disruption and compromise the safety of the passengers. This is your final warning. If you do not comply, we will be forced to use forceful measures." Blake yanked his briefcase away from an attendant who had tried to assist him with his luggage, then screamed, "You will regret this." But no one regretted anything. No one was listening anymore. The two security officers stepped forward, not waiting. Each took one of his arms gently but firmly. Blake struggled, trying to break free, shouting incoherently, "I am a VIP customer. I am the one who has kept this railway afloat for all these years. You are humiliating me in front of those people." His eyes scanned the passengers, but all he received was coldness, silence, and disdain. No one supported him. No one stood up. No sympathetic glances as he passed Zara and Amara. His gaze met the two young women he had once cursed as undeserving, but both remained seated, calm, as if they knew there was no need to speak. The truth was strong enough to speak for them. Blake screamed one last time, his voice faltering, no longer the heavy threat it once was. "You girls, you'll never understand what real power is." Then the sound of the train door closing behind him, a dry, decisive sound, like the closing of a chapter. Silence returned. A few passengers began to clap, not to celebrate a victory, but to applaud the return of order, for right to be restored, for a safe space to be properly protected. Conductor Mitchell nodded briefly to the attendants before returning to her compartment. The carriage lights shifted to blue, and the train began to move down the tracks. In seats 1A and 1B, Zara and Amara sat upright, their hands intertwined. Amara gazed out the window, her voice soft yet full of inner strength. "We didn't need to do anything. The world heals itself when someone dares to stand firm with dignity." Zara simply nodded, her eyes straight ahead, serene. Blake Thompson had left the train, but what mattered more than his expulsion was the confirmation that everyone deserves respect, and no one, no matter their title or privilege, has the right to trample on another. When the click of the train door closing behind Blake Thompson echoed through the carriage, a new breeze seemed to enter first class, like fresh air after a storm. The ceiling lights softened, the hum of the engines began beneath the floor, and it felt as though every passenger sighed in relief simultaneously. No one said it aloud, but everyone understood the persistent oppressive tension had finally ended. However, in the front row, Zara and Amara Washington showed no signs of gloating or triumph. They didn't laugh, clap, or glare at anyone. They remained seated, upright in seats 1A and 1B, as if they had never left, never been under pressure, never been personally insulted. But their gaze had changed. It was clearer and more resolute than ever before. In that moment, Jonathan Pierce, the man representing all executive authority of Coastal Express Railways on this journey, approached the sisters, his face showing the first signs of softness after hours of maintaining a stern expression, not weakness, but respect. He bent down, meeting the eyes of the two young women, and then spoke gently, not as a director, but as an adult who understood that he needed to say the right thing. "Zara, Amara, on behalf of the entire leadership and staff of Coastal Express Railways, I offer you my sincerest apologies. What you've just gone through in no way reflects the values we have always committed to our customers." No one interrupted. Passengers sitting nearby leaned slightly forward in silence, as though acknowledging that they were witnessing something more important than an apology, the acknowledgement of respect. Jonathan continued, No one, whether adult or young, regular passenger or member, should ever face discrimination, insult, or favoritism. This not only harms you, but it also damages the image and trust customers have placed in our railway for many years. His gaze hardened, but this time with rightful determination. We are committed to ensuring this never happens again. Immediately after arrival, I will personally chair an emergency meeting with the entire executive board to review our customer service policies, especially regarding fairness, dignity, and sensitivity when handling situations involving discrimination. The air deepened into another brief pause. Then Amara Washington lifted her head, her deep brown eyes locking onto Jonathan's, not with defiance but with a maturity far beyond her years. "Thank you, sir. I know you are doing the right thing, but the most important thing is not that we received an apology. The most important thing is that no one else ever has to go through what my sister and I went through today." Her voice was gentle, but it carried the weight of a declaration. No passenger looked away. What had seemed like an unwitting audience in a play had now become witnesses to a lesson that went far beyond a train ride. Zara nodded slightly, then added, "Privilege should never allow one to look down on others, and it should never be the reason the crew stays silent when witnessing injustice." Jonathan listened, then slowly nodded, placing his hand gently on the back of the sisters' seats. "You two have not only defended your own rights, but you've also made an entire system reflect, and that to me is more admirable than any membership card." He stood straight, then turned to the surrounding passengers. "We apologize for the delay caused by this disruption, but we also ask for your understanding that those few minutes of delay were in exchange for respect, fairness, and order. These are values that Coastal Express Railways will no longer compromise on." The carriage fell silent for another moment. Then applause erupted, not in unison, not forced, but in solitary, sincere beats from those who understood a small incident on a train today had changed many things. As Jonathan left, Amara gently turned to Zara. "I think we don't need to do anything big to create change. Just don't back down when treated unfairly." Zara smiled faintly, then gently squeezed her sister's hand. "Exactly. And always remember, dignity doesn't come from a first-class ticket. It comes from how you stand up when you're disrespected." In the conductor's compartment, Sarah Mitchell's voice came through the intercom. "Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Sarah Mitchell. The train is now ready to continue its journey. Please remain seated, and thank you for your patience, kindness, and courage during the recent event." The train was preparing to accelerate, but for Zara and Amara, the most important lesson had begun the moment they boarded the train, and it would stay with them for the rest of their lives. The rumbling sound of the engine began to echo steadily beneath the Coastal Express, like a warm prelude signaling that the journey was continuing. On the display screen in the VIP carriage, the words "Now departing" appeared in soft blue. The dim lights slowly shifted to warmer tones, easing away the last shadows left by the earlier confrontation. There were no more shouts, no more pressure, no more presence of the shadow called Blake Thompson. Instead, there was a new atmosphere light, calm and strangely warm. The train attendants, now replaced by a more professional team, moved smoothly between the aisles, adjusting seatbelts, collecting forgotten drink cups, and smiling with genuine goodwill. Perhaps they too understood that this carriage had just experienced something that no manual could ever teach. Truth, dignity, and courage had been reinstated, not by the crew, but by two 17-year-old young women in the front row. Zara and Amara Washington sat still, quietly looking out the window. Outside, the countryside stretched ahead, its green fields and distant hills like a path leading to a new chapter. But inside the train, it was the atmosphere that was truly shifting. A well-dressed older woman in seat 1D suddenly turned to them. "Young ladies?" Her voice was gentle and steady. "I don't know what taught you to stay so calm, but everyone in this carriage sees it and admires it." Amara looked up a bit surprised. Zara just smiled politely. "We just tried to do the right thing, ma'am." The woman nodded, her eyes glinting with satisfaction. Sometimes doing the right thing in the wrong circumstances is more courageous than 1,000 speeches. From seat 2A, an older man with glasses holding an open newspaper also leaned over, his voice gentle. "I've traveled first class for nearly 25 years, and I've never seen two young people act like adults the way you two did when adults stayed silent. Sometimes it's only the young who dare to stand up." Zara gently lowered her head, softly replying, "I think if we stay silent, people like us will keep being overlooked." A small, quiet series of nods followed, not loud, not forceful, just small acts. One nod, one warm gaze, a light touch on the armrest but filled with recognition that needed no words. The train smoothly accelerated along the main track. The signal lights flickered. Conductor Sarah Mitchell's voice came over the intercom, steady as a conductor who had just completed a complicated symphony. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is Conductor Mitchell. We are now continuing our journey to Boston. Please remain in your seats until we reach cruising speed. Thank you for being part of this journey, and thank you for proving that even when there are storms, kindness and fairness are always the choices we can make." Her words made the first-class carriage resonate with a quiet hum, not from the sound, but from the meaning. At that very moment, on the 12th floor of Metropolitan Medical Center in New York, Dr. Sophia Washington, Zara, and Amara's mother stood by the office window. Phone in hand, eyes fixed on the large screen displaying Train 217 as it left the station. The golden light of the afternoon bathed her face, calm but not without emotion. Her phone rang. It was from the Coastal Express Railways Operations Center. The call was very brief, just a few words. "Dr. Washington, the train has departed safely. The situation has been handled thoroughly, and ma'am, your daughters have truly impressed us." Sophia Washington responded with a single sentence, her voice slow and full of emotion. "I don't want my daughters to be treated specially. I just want them to be treated fairly, like any other young person deserves." On the train, as the wheels accelerated on the tracks, the entire carriage swayed slightly before settling. The rows of seats seemed to rise just a little, not just in height but in character. Zara leaned toward Amara. "How do you feel?" Amara didn't look at her sister. She only looked out at the landscape, which was slowly shifting from the golden hue of afternoon to deep green, then gently smiled. "I feel free." The train had departed, but what truly soared today wasn't just the railway carriage. It was courage, dignity, and hope. The view outside the VIP carriage window of Train 217 had turned into a deep, tranquil blue. Thin streaks of cloud slowly faded behind the train, as if the past was also gradually disappearing, not forgotten, but fading away. Inside, the murmurs of conversation returned, but this time they carried no suspicion or tension. Instead, there were light, positive conversations and, in a strange way, admiration. Zara and Amara Washington remained seated in seats 1A and 1B, no longer surrounded by pressure, but by the quiet recognition of those who had witnessed everything. No one cheered loudly, no one hailed them as heroes, but it was the way people chose to speak less and look deeper that showed the important change that had taken place. These two young women had made an entire system rethink itself, not with shouts but with steadfastness. 3 days after the train arrived in Boston, a longer than usual announcement appeared on the homepage of Coastal Express Railways. It wasn't in the news section but was placed at the center like a declaration. The bold headline read, "A new commitment from Coastal Express Railways. Justice, equality, and respect are no longer slogans. They are actions." In the body of the message, the railway's media representative officially acknowledged the incident on Train 217 and announced the launch of a mandatory training program for all staff, from train attendants to managers, focusing on cultural awareness, discrimination handling, and managing sensitive conflict situations. If you were in the first-class cabin that day, which side would you have stood on? Leave your thoughts in the comments below, because your voice might inspire someone else. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on more powerful, inspiring stories like this. Thank you for following. See you on the next journey.